We're on the last episode of the original series of Trigun, and I don't know how to feel because I don't feel sad because I still have the movie next week, and we still have Trigun Stampede to watch. And I know there's one season right now of Trigun Stampede. I know they're making another one, or it's been announced because my anime list was like, you should add this, and I was like, okay. And I know that the manga is coming in a couple months, so I can start looking at that. So I'm not sad, but it definitely feels bittersweet because it feels like, okay, this is the end of the OG series. And regardless of how Stampede is, regardless of the movie and everything, it just feels like one little like checkbox on anime. But honestly, I've wanted to watch this series for years. Since that day I went to that convention and saw that manga volume sitting in the little library there for the manga library they had at the convention. Ever since that day, and that was like back in 2016, to give you a reference, that was back in 2016. Ever since then, like nearly 7 years ago, I've wanted to watch this series. And so I'm really happy that I've sat down and finally watched it. I feel like I'm like, okay, cool. One OG series that I need to see checked off. Because I've had a lot of people say when I did retro series, they're like, oh, you should add Trigun. And I was like, there we go. So I'm really excited to have this final episode. I love Vash. I loved the confrontation he had with his inner self last episode and realizing that it's okay to make a mistake as long as you learn from it and you don't repeat those mistakes, or that you don't, make it a cycle. It's okay. And so I'm very curious to know how he's going to save Knives, what that's going to look like. I'm very excited to see how Stampede translates and refurbishes all of this. We'll see in a couple weeks. But I've really enjoyed this series. The thing about it is it has so much heart. I think a lot of people can complain the animation is wonky. It is. I've seen a lot of 90s anime, and the animation quality at times is very low, but at times it's really great. So it's kind of one of those moments where you don't know what you're going to get. But I feel like for me, animation is one thing. Animation is like a cherry on top of a cake. If the animation is great, amazing, awesome, supplements so much. But for me, the character work, the script, and the acting, the voice work are really what sells me. So if the voice acting is good and the story and characters are good, it kind of elevates it beyond just the animation. Because really, we're watching the story, I know, for a visual medium, but it's still a story at the end of the day. So, and I feel like Trigun has so much heart and just so much soul to it that you just kind of overlook some of those things to really dig into the meat of the story. So, and yeah, and I know that there's a lot the manga's left out that has been left out from the manga in this adaptation, so that's exciting. I'm excited to see how Trigun like reinterprets it. It's gonna be fun. But yeah, we're on the final episode. The only note I forgot to mention it last episode, was KA had talked about Zazi's voice actor was Kamiya. Zazi's voice actor is Kamiya, who plays Sonata in Ace of the Diamond, who plays Levi in Attack on Titan, who plays Rompo in Bungo Stray Dogs, who plays Ego in Blue Lock. Like, all these characters that I really love, Kamiya is the voice actor. And I feel like this was one of Kamiya's earliest roles because it's from so long ago. And so they were just starting in voice acting, so their voice hadn't developed that iconic voice that we hear now. But I'll have to go back and rewatch the episode and be like, oh yeah, that is Kamiya. So I thought that was good to note, so thank you, KA, for saying that. Lots of good comments about the episodes the last couple of weeks. Some really good heartfelt messages, like just Matthew had noted a really good notation about Trigun and the impact that it's had. I was like, yes. But I want to give a quick shout out over to Patreon, to our philanthropy tier members. Y'all have helped me get the manga that's gonna be arriving at my doorstep in a couple months. I've pre-ordered it. The ones that I could pre-order, I have, so that's exciting. But you all have helped me get those. So I want to give a special shout out over to our philanthropy tier members for being so amazing. That includes Edgar, Dana, Alex Cornejo, Be Happy, Kiri, Anime Annie, Tyrone, Sunspots, Translucent Min, Nameless Monster, Shimoyama, Matthew Palfinier, Goob, Ashley Got Snow Bitches, Trails, Zachiel, and Sock. Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate your support, as well as the support from Patreon and YouTube in general, but thank you all so much. All of my love. So yeah, I'm just delaying the inevitable at this point, just delaying the Band-Aid that needs to get ripped off, but I'm ready to go, y'all, and just see what we get. It's Vash and Knives, so what else can be said? So we're gonna start Trigun episode 26. We're gonna do that here in 3, 2, 1, and pull it up here. Let's go. I definitely understand now why Trigun Stampede exists. And why so many people were like, you need to read the manga. Yeah, because, oh my gosh. I mean, going into this episode, I was very curious to know, like, how are you going to wrap up everything with Vash and Knives? Because there's still so much that has not been fully explained to us. And I do appreciate that the story does not feel the need to over-explain every single part. It's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, there are some stories I like that go into depth with what the mysteries and what the sci-fi elements are and things like that, and the fantasy elements. I feel like with a fantasy story that often is based on like supernatural things, you need more of an explanation, and you need to take more time to understand the different concepts in the story and the different elements. With a sci-fi, you can kind of get away with being like a little bit more mysterious, because that's part of the allure, is that you're trying to figure out and piece things together yourself. So the idea that Vash and Knives are plants, that they are these beings that have like an energy supply that is different than humankind, and that there's a lot of things in this episode that were just said that I was like, oh, well, you could go into a lot more detail about that. And I feel like the manga will probably do that. So what I don't want in the comments to read is, oh, well, here's what the manga is going to tell you. If you tell me what the manga is going to tell me, then there's no point in me reacting to the manga. So if you don't want me to react to the manga, fire away. But if you do, then just let me get to that point in the manga, and it'll be fun to talk about it with you all when we get to that point. But I definitely, going into this episode and coming out of it, know that there's so much the manga is going to expand upon, which I'm excited about. That makes me excited to read the manga and be hopeful about it. But I'm also really excited for Stampede now, because I feel like the creators have taken this series and the adaptation that we have, and now they're like, okay, what if we redo it and do this? And so I'm excited to see how it's going to be different from the OG version. I'm excited to see like if there's going to be anything that I discover in the manga that's going to be in Stampede. I'm excited about that. That part I'm really looking forward to. And to have like a modern take on it should be fun. So I'm really excited about Stampede after finishing this original series. But man, this episode did a lot of things I wasn't expecting, and a lot of things I liked, and some things I was like, okay. But man, Knives is just such a weird character. He's so contradictory in a lot of ways, where he sits there with the glass bottle of wine, never mind how it got there, the bottle of wine and the table and chair. The interesting thing about Knives in this moment is he's in this Eden, this paradise, which is what Vash wants to create. And there are so many things in this scene. First of all, the fact that you can use the plants to grow the trees and have this oasis here proves that life can be sustainable here. It's a give and take relationship, right? It's the paradise that Vash wants is possible, which contradicts what Knives said, like, oh, this planet's inhabitable, they'll be dead in like a month or two. No, you just proved creating this paradise that it's possible. It just takes some compromise, which we'll talk about in a second. But second, Knives talks about how he wants to create this paradise for him and his brother. But if you notice, there's a table and one chair. There is no two chairs. Like if Vash had shown up and there were two chairs where him and Knives could sit side by side with one another, then it'd be like, oh yeah, you are trying to create this paradise for the two of you. That's not the case. I feel like that Knives the entire time wanted to make his brother suffer and wanted to pay him back, and just has this vengeful nature, which is hilarious because he talks about how humans are arrogant and selfish and prone to violence, when I'm like, you're prone to violence, Knives. You're incredibly violent. And the best line in the whole episode was when he said, I want to kill the spiders to save the butterflies. That line is so good, because you have a character like Knives who seems like, he's the antagonist. He seems like the villain. But that line there, you could easily see a hero saying this, being like, I'm going to save the butterflies, the defenseless people. I'm going to save them by squashing out the horrible spiders. Knives, he talks about how his brethren, their plant people, their species, are being used as an energy source. which I feel like the manga is going to expand upon a ton, which we'll wait on that. But he talks about that, and in theory with that, it's like, oh yeah, this is horrible. Your race is being used as an energy source. That's awful, right? And he basically says, we're these beings that could be gods among them, and they're just using us, which you can apply in a lot of different ways, symbolically and thematically with real life and things like that. The idea of using a deity as a power source. But he is talking about how that's not fair, and that we're the butterflies, and that we should be squashing out the spiders trying to kill us. But the funny thing is that it's kind of, you can't just limit an entire race of people to just being butterflies or just being spiders. It works both ways, because Knives is very much like a spider throughout a lot of this, and he kind of squashes out a lot of life. And so it's like, are you a butterfly or are you a spider, And I think that the whole point is that there has to be a compromise. There has to be an understanding and a mutual working. An ecosystem needs both. An ecosystem needs spiders and it needs butterflies. So you can't just squash out one or the other in order for it to exist, right? You can't just do that. And what I love about it is, Knives, we're talking about spoilers, Knives reminds me a lot in some ways to Eren from Attack on Titan. Knives' whole dilemma about we need to squash out anybody that would stop the butterflies. Getting into that a little bit. But what I loved about this episode was I felt like I didn't want Vash to kill Knives, because even though Vash has realized that sometimes you have to defend yourself, sometimes you have to perhaps use violence to stop a conflict. Not all the time. It's a very delicate line, right? It's very delicate. You need to be self-aware. You don't need to be furthering the cycle, but you need to stand up for yourself. You can't just be a pushover, right? You can't just self-sacrifice. At some point, you've got to put your foot down and say, you need to stop and listen, right? And we need to do something about this. But I didn't want him to kill Knives, because I didn't want him to compromise who he is and Rim's, influence on him, for the sake, because it's his brother, right? It's his brother. It's his flesh and blood. At the end of the day, he's like, do I really want to kill someone I've been connected to this whole time? And I think it is perfect for Vash's character that he incapacitates Knives. He's like, look, I'm going to be the stronger brother here and put my foot down, okay? And say, no, but I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to save you. And I don't know what to think of him bringing Knives back to this community. I'm like, it ends with such a happy note where he's like, hey guys, got my brother here. I'm like, my homicidal maniac brother who's been trying to destroy mankind for 100 years. How's it going? I'm like, on the one hand, it seems like such a Vash thing to do. Such a Vash thing to do. I'm going to rehabilitate my homicidal brother of 100 years. I'm going to let Millie take care of him. It feels so Vash, though. It's like, of course Vash would do that. Of course he would. Of course he would try to rehabilitate his brother. I don't know how successful that's going to be. I guess the point is that Vash has put his foot down and been like, Knives, you got to stop or I'm going to put you in your place. Because the Vash from before would not have used any violence towards Knives, or when he actually shot him, he ran away because he was like, oh my God, I shot my brother. This is awful, and he ran away, rather than taking responsibility and owning up to what he did and pushing further with it. He ran away. So I do get that. I'm like, okay, yes, we've addressed the problem. We're addressing the problem and working through it. And so I feel like even though the ending was not long enough, I wanted so much more. And I feel like that's the one thing the manga and hopefully Stampede will do, is give us more. Because even though this series is 26 episodes long, I feel like it could have been so much longer. There could have been so much more information and so many more moments. And so I am excited to get into the manga and hopefully get more with that and more expansion on like what the plants are, the history behind Vash's species and Knives species, like how the humans came in contact with them. I hopefully we get a little bit more. I like the series doesn't explain everything to us like a manual. That's great. I was afraid that this episode was going to be a giant exposition dump, which it wasn't. But again, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I'm glad they didn't just throw all this information at us and expect us to sift through it and there'd be nothing left to expand upon character-wise. But this episode also left you so hungry for more, being like, but I want more with these brothers' dynamics. I want more about them. Give me more, show. And God, the callback to the cross and Wolfwood's weapon and it being like put there staked in the ground at the beginning. And then when Knives is about to fire his lasers, that's when Wolfwood's like grabbed it's like his soul came from beyond the grave to tell Vash to get the weapon, and he grabs it from the ground. That part was amazing. I absolutely loved that. But yeah, we see they find the plant with the two brothers and they raise the two of them together. What's interesting and kind of contradictory is that they kind of take on the form of humans, right? Which we've seen the angel versions inside the light bulbs. We've seen they look very alien, and it's almost like they imprinted upon humanity and took on that form, which is so interesting. And the fact that they bleed like humans, I'm like, when Knives is like, oh, we're not humans, we're so much better than them. I'm like, you're not really. You've just got more powers than humans. But at the core of it, you're not that much different, right? At the core of it all, you're not that much different from humanity. You just have more abilities that elevate you amongst what a human can do. But the way that you look, the way that you bleed, it's very similar. And I do feel for Knives. I feel for Knives being upset that humanity is leeching off the living blood of our siblings. I feel Knives's anger at them using his own kind. Like, that part is very relatable. And I like the idea that he tells Vash that. And Vash seems to have, a reverence towards the other plants throughout the entire series. He's like, hey, siblings, sorry this happened to you. The one thing that's interesting is they don't try, instead of destroying humanity, it's like they don't try to rescue their own kind, which is interesting. Because I thought, we've seen the angel and the light bulb, we've seen the others throughout. They're not being rescued from their confinement of being used by humanity. So what was up with that? Why? And that kind of adds to the conversation too. Why didn't Knives want to rescue the siblings, supposedly, that are being used as plants rather than kill mankind? And part of me thinks that Knives didn't want more of his kind around, because that would change the power balance that him and Vash have. Knives has had this constant understanding that he's like, oh, well, I can boss my little brother around because I'm stronger than him. So I'm like, maybe they didn't want to rescue. There's either one of two things. Maybe Knives didn't want to rescue the other plants because he was afraid one of them would be stronger than him and upset the power balance that he had and the control he had. Could be. And two, it could be a contingency that once they're in the light bulbs or being used, they can't be used again. Or they can't be saved. They can't be taken out of the bulb once they're being used. I don't know. I'm hoping the manga or Stampede give us more information about that, but we'll wait and see, right? But yeah, Knives having the simple logic of, I'm going to kill the spiders to save the butterflies. I get it. I get Knives' logic. He's crazy. And the way he goes, he's crazy because he doesn't acknowledge that he's so much like humankind, and he tries to elevate himself above it, but he's not. And Vash kind of realizes throughout the course of his adventures that he's like, we're not really that much different than people. We just have stronger bodies and more power. But at the end of the day, we kind of have simple desires and simple wants and needs. As them, we just like to think that we're elevated, right? I do love the little cocoon that Knives puts himself in. And then there's this Cain and Abel moment where Vash is wondering, do I kill my brother? He killed Rim. But then Rim says no one has the right to take the life of another. And Vash just cries at the top of the mountain being like, my brother is being horrible, but I can't do anything about it. What should have happened, though, is Vash assert himself and been like, no, look, we're going to do this together, but you're not going to hurt people. Vash needed to assert himself and be assertive against Knives, but it just wasn't happening. It's like, it just wasn't happening in that moment. And then he cries about it, and he wakes up with the blanket over him. And I like that they both have the little knapsacks, kind of like what Vash carries throughout the series. It's similar that they both have, and their spacesuits kind of just continuously evolve. And we see like humanity slowly spread out over time. And we see them, like, in desperation, we see a riot form and everybody gets mad. And we see how humankind can so easily, like, go off the deep end and easily, violently react. And Knives gets mad about that. But then how does Knives react? He uses the power of his brethren to, like, make them, like, kneel. And it's like, well, are you really that much different? He's like, what did you do? And Vash is like, Knives seems to always have had an understanding of the power of the plants more than Vash did. And he's like, what is that? What did you do? And Knives he's like using the power of their people to kind of get their attention. He's like, well, we have our own wills now. And that's kind of, you know, that comes up too in the idea that they're both these beings, and Knives is kind of like, we're like gods. We have our own wills. We can do whatever we want. And Vash is like, we can't do whatever we want. That's gonna, you know, that could hurt somebody. So the thing of it is, they go to the ship 10 years later. I like that both of them wandering through the desert, like, unsuspecting. What's interesting is they grow, like, within, like, 20 years. They grow to their adult selves, and then they stop growing. Like, they're it's almost like they just hit a plateau and they just stop aging. I don't know how that works, but whatever. It's anime logic. We'll go with it. It's sci-fi. And so they go to the ship, and he's like, well, there's something I need to fetch, something I left behind, but it's going to take a while, so wait here. And the thing about it is that Vash waits for a year in the ship by himself. And he talks about being so lonely. And he's like, I don't want to be alone. And that's when Knives shows back up with the guns. And so the thing about it is, again, contradictory, like Knives being so contradictory. He left Vash, his brother, alone outside a ship for a year, just waiting there while he made these guns that contain the power of their brethren. So it's like, you just said that you didn't want your brethren to be used by the humans, but you're using your brethren to wipe out the humans. So is it all that different? No. And so it's just like, what? And Vash is like, this isn't right. And I feel for Vash because he's kind of in the dark the whole time. But we have the two guns from the OP. We're going to use these guns to wipe out mankind. And then it's like, well, why would we do that? And he's like, are you still worried about this nonsense about humanity? And he's like, we're going to make this into our own Eden. And Vash is like, this is wrong. And that's when he shoots Knives in the leg. And Knives is like, what, you shot me? I'm like, well, yes, because you're being a crazy person. Like, oh my gosh. But rather than Vash put his foot down and be like, yes, I shot you, now quit being an asshole, and talk it out, rather than doing that, he runs away. And him running away for 80 years gives Knives all this time to build up this hate. And I think that's such an interesting point of perspective there, just to say, like, I like that we get Vash with his, like, hair down and everything. It's the idea that when you have an argument with someone, if you put that distance between them, it just gets worse. Rather than confronting the problem, talking it out, and getting over it, it just creates this distance and it's a problem. I have this in my own family where I have two family members that they had an argument, and rather than just talk it out, let it be over and be done with, instead of doing that, they put this distance between themselves, and it's just grown bigger. Like, the argument and the hatred between these two family members has just gotten bigger. And it's so frustrating to watch because you want to be like, can you guys just talk it out and move on? But they won't. And so it feels very much like a Knives and Vash conflict. And you can see that in real life. If you don't just address the problem, work through it, and move on, then you get this growing dissent between each other, and it just gets worse. And it just never solves itself. It just is like a festering wound. So then we find out Vash, like, gets his coat from the ship. We get that. He gets his coat, the geranium coat. He goes and hangs out with all the people. He celebrates with humanity. He mourns with them. That shot of him, like, mourning all the dead, like, just Vash's pure heart, where he, like, celebrates with humanity and he mourns with it. Like, he just, because he doesn't die, right? And then we see him and the little girl. We see Jessica and them on the ship 80 years, later, where he finds, what does it say? Revenant Buscus. And it says his birth date May 16th. Hometown Cleveland! Yep. His studies establish a new plant theory. Survival of the crew was confirmed. Yep, he's still alive. He's someone related to Rim. And so Vash traveled to go find him, and when he shows up, Knives beat him there, and had already killed him. He's like, oh, hey. He's like, now you don't have to worry. I killed the last remnants of Rim. Now you don't have to worry because you don't have to, everything joining you and Rim is gone. It's just terrifying. And the thing of it is that Vash and them go like just, oh my God, you weepy faced kid. And Knives blows his arm off. He blows his arm off. Now, I'm assuming it's his real arm that he gets off because Vash, seems in pain. And then Knives activates the gun. What's sad is that Knives knew what the guns could do the entire time, but he never told Vash because I don't think Vash would use it if he knew what it was. So he never told Vash, but it's also kind of like a insurance policy for Knives because now Knives can use the gun against Vash if needed. And it's like, that's your brother. What are you doing? And he causes the situation with July and asks if he's going to shoot him again. And he does. And then Vash does, but then he leaves. So then we have Legato. And we have Legato and the plants and Knives' extended torso shot. And he asks him to make Vash suffer. And Legato says, I know. The man belonging to this arm will suffer. So Legato is given Vash's arm and the gung-ho gang. So that's so fascinating to me that these members were all imbued with the powers of the plants, we're assuming, and Legato was given Vash's arm. Again, there's so much in the manga that I'm sure will expand upon this. Like, I want to know Legato's backstory, how he got hooked up with Knives, what the deal is. I want to know more about that relationship, but I feel we'll find out more either in Stampede or the manga. So I'm curious about that. I'm excited to find out more about that. The one thing I didn't like about the episode was that we got this like extended recap. It was only a couple minutes, which it wasn't bad, but I was like, for the final episode, we don't need a recap. We don't need that at all. We need to just go to this final episode. And Knives asking, did you enjoy pretending to be a human? And Vash saying, yeah, it was the greatest. And then the two of them having this shootout. I did not expect Knives and Vash to just, I guess it should make sense that they would have a shootout at this point. It should have made sense. Should have been expected, but I wasn't expecting it to go down like this. I wasn't expecting there to be this shootout between the two of them. But sure. Sure, of course there is. We'll go with that. Yep, fine. But yeah, them just having this shootout against one another, because at this point, what else do we do? And for a while, it's just a draw. Like, it's just a draw between the two of them. But Knives does everything he can to not immediately shoot Vash in the face. Like, he shows the energy cannons and the feathers coming out of the cannons and the wings. Like, it makes them, it's like an angel. It was very Neon Genesis. Very Neon Genesis, a lot of this, especially the two cannons going at each other. And he's like, I made this so that we could, destroy mankind together and have our own paradise. I love that Vash, again, he activates the cannon too to control the blast that Knives gives off. And there's feathers and everything. They're ethereal beings, supposedly, so them having this angelic quality mixed with the energy cannon. I like it. I feel like, again, the manga will expand upon it, and there's more to it than this, because Vash immediately getting control over, and the cannons have angel bodies to them too, like they have faces on the end of them and like angelic bodies. Again, very Neon Genesis. I feel like there's more to it. And this episode just kind of like says, here it is. And it's like, okay. But I wanted more about the cannons and more about the plants and about their species. So I'm hoping we get a little bit more in the manga and Stampede. Would be nice. But yeah, there's like a halo around it, and there's like angels connected to it all. I feel like there's so much more that we just haven't had expanded upon. And Knives is like, I can't talk sense into you, can I? And so Knives just has this superiority complex where he believes he's just better than everybody else. And Vash is like, I'm not going to repeat the same mistakes. I'm not going to just run away from my brother. I'm going to confront him, and I'm not going to kill anyone. It's like there's multiple mistakes Vash doesn't want to repeat. He doesn't want to run away from his brother in the conflict anymore. He wants to confront him. He doesn't want to kill anybody anymore, which I'm glad he didn't. I was like, he injures him. He incapacitates Knives. But at the end of the day, and Knives getting his gun and everything, again, Wolfwood helping out in the very end. Bless him. Because, yeah, he has both guns. And I was wondering if Knives having both was going to backfire on him. But then using Wolfwood's weapon to get it, and he's able to incapacitate Knives. Yep. I'm glad he doesn't kill him. He's like, I'm going to survive. But I love that. I love that I'm going to survive and keep moving forward. I love that for a number of reasons. One, it shows that Vash isn't giving up on life and Rim's dream. He got a few points in this series where he was seeming like he was reaching that. And I'm glad he decided to live and live through, like the last episode says. But then also he's like, I'm going to survive, but I can't survive without my brother. So I'm going to let you live. And then we get Meryl and Millie and the well, like them striking water. I'm glad that them striking water was not like a result of Vash, killing Knives or him dying. It was that they've been working this whole time and just showing like human resilience and their ability to survive. And Millie's like, Mr. Vash is going to come back, won't he? And Meryl's like, you're darned right he will. He wouldn't keep a good woman like me waiting. I like that it's open-ended. We don't get to see if Meryl confesses to Vash or whatever, even though he's an alien. Come on now. But it is implied that she might do that when he comes back. Leaving it open for the fan fiction. But yeah, I want to see more. And the idea that he wraps Knives up and takes him with him. He's like, come on, Rim, I'm going to search for my own words. He's like, I'm going to find my own future now. And I am sad he leaves the red coat behind. And he leaves the guns behind. Which, I destroyed them before leaving them behind. So I guess nobody but him and Knives can use them. So it's not like they're going to be beneficial to anyone else. But he leaves the weapons behind, which is good. And he leaves behind the weapons. But he leaves behind the coat, which I thought was interesting. Because it's like, I like that he's like, I'm going to carry Rim's message in my heart, but I'm going to find my own path and my own words to describe my own mission. So it's symbolic to leave the coat behind, but I'm like, that's a damn good coat. I would have taken that with me. But he chooses to leave it behind. And I love at the very end, we see him showing up with Knives. And him waving to them. So we get a happy ending, a very concerning happy ending, because I'm like, I just imagine Knives being like strapped to a chair. I'm reading a story called Heaven Official's Blessing, and in Heaven Official's Blessing, the main character has a cousin who is kind of like Knives in the sense that they are very antagonistic and very just like against humanity. And so there is a little similarity there. But in that series, the protagonist kind of like strings their cousin along and just makes them come with them against their will. So I just imagine Knives being like strapped to a chair and Millie being like, well, I'll give you some soup, sir. And he's like, I don't want your soup. And like just being the worst. I just imagine that. So I don't know. I'm very curious to see what the other series are going to give us now. So that's exciting. But I am happy to have like a somewhat happy ending. I'm glad Vash didn't die. I'm glad Knives didn't die. I'm very curious how this is all going to shake out in the end, but the story doesn't tell us. I guess the moral of the story is no matter what happens from now on, Vash knows that if he has to fight Knives, he will. If he has to beat Knives, he can. But he's going to keep trying to pursue his own path the way that he wants it. Good for him. Good for Vash. Good for Vash indeed. So, yay. I'm really curious, though, to know your thoughts down below. Next week, we've got the movie, which I'm excited about. We're going to have the movie next week and just watch it. And then after that, we're going to start Stampede. So that's exciting. I'm ready for it. But in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week with more of Trigun Tuesday. Bye!